Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Dan and Amy, we've been following this story all week. Been reporting it on one of the newspapers I started, DuPage Policy Journal. The story of Sterigenics in Willowbrook. By the way, another community forum sponsored by the EPA today at Ashton Place in Willowbrook to provide updates concerning ethylene oxide and the alleged cancer risk from emissions from the Sterigenics facility in Willowbrook. We've talked about this, and unfortunately, politicians and people that have been thrown into a frenzy over the initial erroneous reporting by the EPA and the CDC are not interested in the fact that the EPA has essentially conceded that they had no data, that they made a pronouncement based on models. They have no evidence to suggest anything of the sort of a heightened cancer risk in Willowbrook and Burr Ridge and Hinsdale from the operation of the Sterigenics facility. This is a company, again, that sterilizes medical equipment. Just to give you a sense here, the EPA has acknowledged it never had any actual evidence that Sterigenics' emissions were in violation of the Clean Air Act before it decided to target the company. An investigation that started in the agency's Region 5 Chicago office based on sort of a hunch, looking at census tracts. The statement: the agency's National Air Toxics Assessment identified census tracts in the Willowbrook area as a potentially higher risk community. This is based on air quality modeling. It does not rely on any air monitoring data. Additionally, data that was actually called together by Sterigenics, who enlisted a third-party vendor to test the Chicagoland area, and finds there are normally occurring levels of background EO, ethylene oxide, across the entire area. This according to a statement released by Sterigenics this week. The gas was detected in 38 of the 39 samples taken October 12th to 23rd. Sterigenics said the methodology used in the measuring was sound. The samples free of other gases that would skew the results. Something you didn't get from the EPA. And again, even if the EPA's modeling was right, to experience a slightly heightened risk of cancer as a result of these emissions, according to chemists and environmental engineers, you would have to stand in the exact same place.
For what, 32 years?
33 years.
In your house. Just stand there.
And the response to this, in spite of all the EPA has conceded and their Orwellian statement that fell short of a mea culpa, but if you can read between the lines and interpret newspeak from government bureaucracies, you know what they were saying. We created a scare, and we don't really have the juice to back it up. Still, legislation kicking around in Springfield, and now at the federal level, Sack-Durbin, Duckworth, Lipinski, Foster, Schneider, introducing a bill to require the EPA to revise standards for ethylene oxide emissions. And this press release from Brad Schneider's office, he's really truly a congressman, which EO emission standards for medical sterilization and chemical facilities, which have been the source of harmful emissions in Illinois. They have? Says who? Sterigenics and Medline Industries and Vantage Specialty Chemicals in Lake County have been cited for high carcinogenic ETO emissions. The EPA failed to promptly notify Illinois residents about the potential dangers and has not updated its emission standards, so on and so forth. That's all bull jive. what we now know to be true from the EPA. And in Springfield, the same thing is going on. There's legislation that's probably not going to move today being the last day of veto session, but will be picked up again by the Democrat Socialists down there to shadow Durbin and the gang at the federal level next year. I mean, it's remarkable. They have nothing, and the scare persists, and the demagoguery persists, and the trial lawyers' marketing, birth defects, cancer risk, billboards persists. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by Steve Milloy. He is the founder of the website junkscience.com. He was also a member of President Trump's EPA transition team. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you've followed this story a bit. What's your reaction to where we are now with the EPA having another community forum today? That should be interesting.
Yeah, I just think it's ridiculous. You know, EPA has been scaring people for 40 years about chemicals unnecessarily. There's no cancer risk. The modeling they did was fake. The science is fake. There's nothing going on. It sounds like a political hit job to me. I think it's important for people to realize that this is not really coming from the Trump administration. This is more deep state. You know, the whole Obama culture, and really the whole EPA culture since 1970. You know, it's I don't know what else to say about it. It's just all fake.
When Tammy Duckworth says, as she said in this release, our government is failing to protect Americans from breathing in toxic air, and that's absolutely unacceptable. Even at low levels, ethylene oxide is dangerous to the public health.
It does. I mean, that's a lie. There's no scientific evidence to back that up. I mean, Tammy Duckworth, she has no idea what she's talking about. Now, I know that, you know, environmentalists and anti-chemical nuts, I mean, they're trying to scare people. They've been trying to scare people about chemicals for decades now. And the fact is, it's just not true. There's no evidence to back that up. Our air is clean and safe. It's always been safe. It hasn't always been that clean, but we fixed that, and the air's been, you know, crystal clean for about 30 years now. And I just, you know, it's really disturbing to see this stuff pop up. And of course, it popped up, you know, in the context of the election, and you know, may have affected the election. It's just all terrible.
Well, are they truly safe now? And how will the U.S. EPA ensure Willowbrook will be safe in the future?
Well, we have standards. They're being implemented. There's no violation of any standard. The standards are uber stringent as it is. I mean, the standards aren't set at a safe level. They're set at orders of magnitude below a safe level. So the air is safe. I mean, is there stuff in the air? Yeah. I mean, we can measure trace levels of chemicals in the air, but that's a far cry from being dangerous. And cancer risk? No way. That's, you know, 40 years ago when we really didn't know much about, you know, human exposure to chemicals, yeah, it might have been reasonable to be concerned about that kind of stuff. But, you know, 40 years on, we've spent tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of research, and so we know this stuff does not pose a risk. Yet at EPA, you know, they pretend that it does just to keep their whole shtick going.
I should have credentialized you at the beginning so people know you're not just like some radio jock like me spouting off, that you actually know what you're talking about. BA in Natural Sciences from Johns Hopkins, Master of Health Sciences and Biostatistics from Johns Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health, and also JD from University of Baltimore, which actually cuts against your scientific credentials. But so when, I mean, you've literally had this at these town halls, which will come as no surprise to you. Moms getting up and saying, is it safe for my kids to play outside near the Sterigenics plant?
Yeah.
And what do you say to them?
Well, of course it is. I mean, of course it is. You know, and I know that may not sound very comforting, but I don't know what to tell people. I mean, there's no evidence to back up what EPA did. Ethylene oxide does not cause cancer in the air. There's no evidence that it has. You know, there's no evidence that it's at dangerous levels, which would be incredibly high to start with. You know, the whole EPA it just screwed up, And this is not the first time. EPA has been doing this for 40 years, scaring people unnecessarily about chemicals.
And here's the other thing I want to mention. Number one, as I said when we were talking about this yesterday, I'm not saying the EPA always gets it wrong, and I'm not saying that there aren't polluters out there that should be prosecuted for maliciously polluting the environment, endangering people's health. It's stipulated on both those scores. In addition, I'm not saying that computer modeling is necessarily bad science, but when you have data that doesn't comport with your model, and then you change the data to comport with your model, like we caught the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration doing earlier this year with respect to climate change, that's when it becomes a problem. And it's sort of the same thing here. When you take your model and say cancer risk and enlist the hysteria of the media and the trial lawyer set to amplify it, that's not responsible.
Well, look, these models have never been verified. It's one thing if you have a model that's been verified someplace. None of the, not only the air dispersion models, the stuff coming out of the stacks, not only those things not really been verified, but the cancer models themselves. These are just assumptions, worst case assumptions, that, chemicals like ethylene oxide cause cancer. It's just an assumption. It's not even an assumption at this point. It's just wrong because we have lots of data. We have decades of data that fail to show that chemicals in the environment, environmental exposure levels cause cancer.
Well, do you think the U.S.
I know you're not going to read about that in the paper, but
right. Well, do you think they owe Willowbrook and the residents an apology? Should they, pay them for costs incurred during this time when they had to, the city officials or in the mayor's office, they had to hire people to explain even the report because the U.S. EPA wouldn't explain what these results were and what it meant.
An apology is the least they owe these people. I mean, I think President Trump should start shutting down these EPA regional offices. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, before there were, state EPAs and departments of environmental protection, there was kind of a need for, this huge federal environmental agency. But 50 years on, states and local governments can take care of this stuff, and we don't need the federal government going in there and scaring people with their, nationalized propaganda. So I think the least they owe the community is an apology. These people should really resign.
He is Steve Milloy, founder of JunkScience.com, a member of President Trump's EPA transition team. Steve, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yep. Anytime. Bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
We're in the